Okay. Today, our guest is Gabe Hyde from IT Hands. We are super excited to have him. This is really a coup to get him to come and speak up here with us. Gabe is very active in the WordPress community, and he is going to be talking today about how you can outsource some of your work effectively and to your greatest benefit. Thank you so much for coming today, Gabe.
Thanks. Thanks. Well, it's great to see everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. So I think I know about half the room, which is cool. And it's great to meet the other half. So yeah, April, thanks for the intro. And really today, the topic is going to be about this, this word, outsourcing. Really kind of what that is, the types of outsourcing. We're gonna go through that today as well. How to find the right outsourcing partner, some best practices based on our experience, and I'll share more about that in a second. And then really kind of wrap things up with some benefits of outsourcing. So where I'd really like to start, and I think it's helpful, this is definitely not a sales pitch, and it's really nothing but just facilitating a conversation. So it's funny for me because when I hear the word outsourcing, I have some kind of immediate thoughts on what that looks like. So I'm curious, is anybody willing to kind of give me like a blanket definition of what outsourcing is in general, just to kick us off and kind of set the context for the rest of the presentation? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Getting someone else to do your work for you.
Yeah, getting someone else to do your work for you. Ability.
I think, you know, some businesses might have a marketing department and might have an in-house marketing department, in-house web development team. For those that don't, they outsource that to us. And then even us that might have an agency, or maybe an aspect of our business like SEO or content writing or video production or something that we don't do, and then we outsource that to somebody else. So it's whatever you don't do, can't do, don't want to do in-house.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think both of those wrapped up perfectly. And it saves me from having to give a lot of caveats about this being a sales pitch, because you can really outsource anything. And for the context of today's discussion, I know it's relevant for us to talk about development, design, particularly with WordPress, but you can outsource anything. And so I'm definitely not selling the concept of outsourcing, but just kind of opening up our minds and facilitating a conversation around what that might look like. So we'll go pretty high level. I know you guys have probably done a lot of thinking all morning, so this can kind of be your like rest time. We'll keep it high level discussion, and then we'll move into some more practical things toward the end of the presentation. So we really just talked about this. I mean, outsourcing is just that. It's just giving a service to an outside supplier that you could otherwise potentially do in-house, build out a team to do it in-house, but it's you know, sending that to another supplier so that hopefully it kind of frees you up to do something else. One other point I'd like to make is it doesn't have to be offshore. So I'm surprised nobody said that, but one thing that I think about outsourcing, I immediately go to like the Netflix show, outsourced, or to the movie or something like that. So I'm immediately thinking like offshore, but that's not the case at all. I know that we could act in the room, we can outsource to each other. And so I don't want the offshore concept to be the total thought around outsourcing. So a few things that I hear, and I didn't talk about this much, but the context that I'm personally bringing into this. So I work for a company called IT Hands, and in 2001, we started a company in India where we're really receiving a lot of outsourced projects. So I know what you're thinking, 2001, I wasn't in diapers, but I was still like watching cartoons and stuff. So I've only been around for a couple years. And so a lot of the context and kind of the experience of what we're bringing into this particular discussion is from doing this for a long time and receiving outsourced projects, but then also just in the last 2 years, hundreds of conversations with people about what that looks like. So, I mean, these are horror stories. These are great scenarios of outsourcing, but it's really just experience of what I've seen and what I hear from owners. So let's talk about a few of these. And I would love to get your input, maybe even hear some chuckles from you guys, because I know some of you personally. But one statement I hear a lot is owners want to work more on the business rather than in the business. So thinking more high level, right? More CEO level thinking, being the CEO of your business rather than in the weeds so much and on some of the details of the project. So examples, I mean, have any of you guys ever gotten a late night call like, hey, this has got to be fixed like immediately? And it's essentially somebody making a call directly to the CEO of the company asking for something to be done immediately. And I know that that's not always realistic to just say, hey, I'm not touching this, I'm going to give it to somebody else. I'm saying this is something I hear often, just getting pulled into minor issues. And then one in particular, just getting too focused on project details, delivery, making clients happy, all that stuff's extremely important. But what falls off when that happens? Quality? Maybe not quality. Well, I mean, I could see that. Sales. So, I mean, if you're running a small business, you're the CEO of your company, a lot of times that doubles as a sales role, right? You're out trying to close new projects, close new deals. So if you're in the weeds on projects, a lot of times sales and marketing kind of falls by the wayside. And so you got to keep that pipeline full. Another thing I hear is owners don't want to turn down projects, but they have to. They get too bogged down, too caught up in things, and they have to turn down projects because they don't have anybody to do them. And that's more of a capacity and a competency issue. So we'll talk about that a little more later in the presentation. And then the other thing I hear, and this is maybe not totally relevant to everybody, but this is more, kind of a bigger agency type problem as well. But hiring full-time staff and then keeping them busy all the time, having enough in the pipeline that you know there's going to be enough projects for them to stay busy, and that keeps a lot of people up at night. So how about some use cases on when you should outsource? I think a big one is when you want to grow. I know when I kind of entered into this world, I was surprised to see there's a lot of people who are fairly content with where they are as a business, and they don't necessarily care to grow. They're happy. They can handle everything with one or two people, and maybe that person doesn't need to outsource anything. They're just happy where they are. But if you want to grow, outsourcing is a fairly quick, sustainable, and scalable way to be able to go out and close a bunch of deals and have a team that's lined up to do them. And then refocusing on your strengths. So if you love to design, I want to keep you designing. If you love to manage projects, keep managing projects. If you love to build and to code, have somebody else do the other stuff. That's another great use case for outsourcing that I think kind of ties into a much bigger picture, just quality of life and enjoying what you're doing, enjoying running your business, but continuing to do what you like to do. And then also when reducing overhead. So this is more the concept of keeping a lean team, keeping a small team. So obviously, when you can outsource some of the things that are easy to outsource or whatever, it's typically less employees, less overhead, less office space, equipment, HR, all of the above. The value of an outsourced partner. So I referenced earlier thinking about competency and capacity, and those are two words we use a lot in terms of thinking the value that an outsourced team would add to a firm. And so I think immediately when you start looking at options of other teams or other individuals that you could send work to, it could potentially be an immediate increased tech skill set. So you get into something super deep with WordPress, you've never seen it before, it's really complex, but it's a piece of a project that you've got to get it done. Find somebody that knows that complexity of WordPress and have them help you. Or just have them do that portion of the project. One thing that we hear a lot, so we do a lot of WordPress internally, but we also do some other technologies as well. So we spend a lot of time in mobile apps. Well, this is a space that has grown rapidly in the last several years and is continuing to grow and change and all that stuff. Well, one quote I hear all the time, particularly from WordPress shops, you might have your favorite client that is really pumped about this new mobile app idea. And they come to you and say, hey, I really want to build this out. I've got this idea. I've got this use case and I want to do it. We don't want to tell them just, hey, sorry, don't know how to help you. And you might, and that's okay. But if you didn't want to, you could find a team that could do that project. And then capacity, that speaks for itself. So instant ability to go out, feel like you can work really hard on the sales side, close deals, and have a team to be able to do the projects when they come in. And then decrease costs. This one's debatable, and I know that a lot of the rates that we hear, I mean, they can vary. I mean, from anywhere from $50 an hour to $150 an hour. It's across the board. I mean, I see it all over. So it is variable from, or debatable from that standpoint, I think, in terms of hourly rates. But if you think about bringing a $100 an hour developer on full time, you're doing much more than just paying them per hour. You're putting a roof over their head. I used to have a boss that would say, you know, you're wearing out my furniture, you know, so like you're always kind of using furniture in somebody's office space. And so, yeah, it's just decrease costs in general. Let me stop. Anything anybody is thinking at this point? Any questions, any thoughts, any comments before we keep going? There'll be time. No problem. So now let's get into the types of outsourcing options. I don't think any of this is going to be brand new information for you, but it's what I hear in the marketplace a lot, what a lot of people are doing. And we can talk about some specific stories around each one of these. So it's really two types for today, onshore versus offshore. So a few of the onshore options, Upwork. Is everybody familiar with that platform, Upwork? So it's really just a marketplace for developers, freelancers to post a profile and then have people come and hire them. Is that a fair definition of Upwork? Just a marketplace to be able to go and hire outside freelancers or contractors. And again, there's local freelancers and contractors. So I know that could apply to even, I'm not totally sure, but even people here today that, you know, have a strong network locally, or even not so much locally. It could be in another state. It could be whatever. But I think when I think local in this context, it's more kind of stateside, not offshore. And that's another option. And then agency to agency, which I definitely know applies in this room today. And I would encourage it in a lot of different scenarios. And I'll give you an example for us internally. So we have design staff, we have development staff, and we're not a marketing firm at all. So we recently went through kind of a, not so much a rebranding, but more of a brand refresh. And one thing that one of our founders has always been pretty heavy on, he's like, well, why would we send design out when we have designers internally? And I get that. I mean, that makes sense. Like, we should be able to do our own project, right? We should be able to do our own site. But can anybody identify with the fact that that is the first thing that always gets pushed way down the priority list when your clients come calling, right? The first thing that gets put down is, hey, I'm not going to redesign my site right now. I've got to do all this other stuff. You just never find the time to do it. So that was one issue for us. And then the other issue was we just wanted some fresh eyes. We wanted like a third-party approach. You know, we're so close to our own marketing that it was hard for us to do it. And so one thing we did is we hired a client, a current client of ours. Said, hey, like, just act like, you know, like you're marketing to yourself is basically what we needed. And so we're kind of on the tail end of that process right now. It's been fun. So that's just an example of how we've done that internally, kind of going agency to agency. Did I leave out any options there? You might think of anything else?
One thing I would say is on Upwork and platforms, there are really two types of those too. Some are vetted marketplaces and some are not. Some are just free for all, where you can sign up. Codable, Toxel, there are several that actually vet and test very strongly. I've seen it even when you look for different copywriting content marketing platforms.
Right.
The same kind of thing. So it doesn't matter what you do. Some just open it up and say, hey, we just match people, and some really try to make sure they have the best providers on them.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. Yeah, there's going to be a kind of an interesting time later that hopefully we can get some good participation on, but I've heard some tough stories from platforms like that, but I've heard some great stories. So it's good to know that there are kind of vetted marketplaces there. That's great to keep in mind when you start to look. And we'll have a section of the presentation that really talks about that vetting piece as well. It's extremely important. Anything else? Any other pieces that I missed there? Haven't gone, okay, perfect. We'll talk about offshore too. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So offshore, when you think about what that looks like, it pretty much in every scenario is a cross-cultural team. So even in looking at this presentation, I'll look at that, and that's kind of a strong statement, cross-cultural team. But it's so true. I mean, even a lot of times, I mean, we know the U.S., right? We're in the South, and we would say that culture in the Northwest is significantly different than culture in the South. You know, culture in the West. I mean, that's even cross-cultural in some ways. We won't go that far today. But, you know, pretty much in every scenario, you're dealing cross-culturally. And it's a really common outsourcing option, is to work with a cross-cultural team. And one other one that I thought about, intentionally left it off, but I thought about it. It's a really interesting model in that we even see some firms going and building their own team. So going to a place like India, going somewhere in South America, spending time there and actually building an extension of their team, almost like that's the second office. So I don't know that technically that would be outsourcing, because that's really kind of, it's really kind of the same company doing business in another office and whatever, but it, you know, it essentially kind of looks like it in a lot of ways. And that's like, even our model is somewhat debatable. Because we're kind of receiving the outsourcing, but we're not outsourcing it to my team in India, because that's my team in India. We have, you know, 2 offices there, and those are my colleagues. So.
What about engaging somebody on the team?
Engaging someone from the team in another culture to kind of help walk you through some of those. So that's a great idea. Yeah. Like say for like someone from Latin America working with the team in Latin America, something like that. Right. It's a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of really cool ways you can structure this, and I think structure it really well. I mean, it speaks to kind of the global society that we live in now. Number one, technology, just so easy to do it now, to communicate with somebody in some crazy place that you've never been to and it's thousands of miles away, but it's so simple. And that's actually a really great idea, because it truly does. It kind of ties together that human element of the 2 cultures. That's right. We'll talk a little more about that too later. So here's some local options. Covered this somewhat. Upwork, contractors, freelancers, agency to agency. So why would you do it? Why would you choose local over offshore? We can open that up, but we could also kind of walk through those points. Anybody have initial thoughts before we jump into this? Why would you choose like a local or onshore team versus an offshore team? Control?
Yeah, bad experiences outsourcing.
Bad experiences outsourcing to India?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And, so we came back. It was more expensive.
Right. Right. Sure. So let me ask you a question on that. Did you anything you did differently with that local team? Did you meet with them more? Did you see them more?
No, it was an MRI, and we needed somebody free.
Mm-hmm.
And India gave us a price that was
Mm-hmm.
local.
Right.
We tried if we could send them films, and they would get back to us within 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we wanted to make a copy of it, but it didn't work.
Right.
We didn't know that person individually. We couldn't target one person in India.
Mm-hmm.
It was a team.
Sure.
And it turned out the team was hundreds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and they never gave us their right name.
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of them.
Yeah. Sure.
Pardon? We would, yeah,
Well, the quality of response, I guess, was okay in most instances, but if there was a question, then when we put the question back, we did somebody else. And you couldn't target them.
You just have a dedicated person.
No, and they would give us that. We tried a number, so we had to bring it in now.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't bring it in. We were able to send, we could send the films anywhere we wanted.
Right.
And it was almost a week.
Right.
And so we did it with a local hospital. One person dedicated, if he wasn't here, he had a team of 5 others, but we do all.
Mm.
And if there was a problem, they were able to.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
$40.
Right.
20 a day.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
But we paid it. It's going good.
There we go.
I think another benefit of doing onshore is no cultural divide.
Mm.
You don't need a cultural liaison to make sure that we're interacting appropriately with the team.
Yes.
Or even with us.
Right.
I would even say it's good to work hyper-local, and I mean, just like in our county, in our little region,
Mm-hmm.
it really builds our community. It's great to just develop and grow more,
Sure.
stronger as a community.
Right. Yeah.
I think that as you, I'm sorry.
No, that's
But
great.
as you grow in technological complexity, that gets harder and harder because you may not have those people.
Maybe, well, and I was speaking very broadly. I mean,
Sure.
shopping locally, eating at local places, and again, just working with other people.
Right.
Time zone is a big problem in our business.
Yeah.
Because let's say it's 9 o'clock here, and you're good with your provider that's on the West Coast, so
Yep.
it's 6 o'clock there. So you're sitting around working on issues at 12 o'clock here, calling the time like, hey, this guy's in the office here, can I have my coffee first?
Yeah.
Or if you're a client in England, and one time, first time you see them, it's, right, 2 at 9 o'clock, well, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so they're, other things, 12 hours lunch. So, depending on your service, a 30-minute response time on service is good, it's still up front, but it has to be the correct situation for what services you need.
Sure.
The client, which is 5%.
Especially if you're providing the work on, like, you're outsourcing the work that you provide on that. So if you're working with clients, time, that's the number one issue we see.
Right.
Is time.
Yeah.
So,
I have the same issue. I moved to Seattle.
Did you really? I love Seattle. I did not mean, I love Seattle, by the way. It's one of my favorite cities on this earth.
Have you been to Lee?
I was there a year and a half ago.
People in Seattle, generally, hands-on skills you have.
Really? Yeah, I've seen that. Yep.
But at any rate, I have several problems there now. This time zone thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was a problem.
Yeah. That Pacific time zone is
Yeah.
that much harder. Yep. These are great points, and it's really hard. I mean, you guys can imagine it's hard for me to come fully into this conversation not being biased in some way, given what I do every day. But I truly want to reemphasize this is absolutely a conversation. Like, these are amazing points, and yeah, and we're going to talk about it. That's why I'm excited. This is good. We mentioned some of this, not directly, but I think the time zone thing, mentioned that there. I think it is easier in some ways. Maybe this ties into some of the cultural gaps and that kind of thing. It's easier to establish a personal relationship with someone that you just immediately understand and know the culture, right? So that's easier probably in Cherokee County. If somebody's right down the street in Cherokee County, it's easier to establish a quick personal relationship with that person. You can meet them in person, all that stuff. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you guys mentioned some really great reasons why, go the local option for outsourcing as well. Control, that's a great point. I think the challenge is sometimes it's perceived control. but even just the perceived control is good. You know what I mean? Knowing that you can go down the street and talk to the person that's doing the work, and kind of get a handle on things if needed or something like that. It doesn't always have to be a bad scenario, but just to walk down and walk in their office and say, hey, what's going on? Where are we on the project? That's a great feeling. It really is. So a couple points to mention about picking the right local team. So believe it or not, I actually hear some pretty bad stories of even outsourcing locally. And it's always tough to hear that, because a lot of times there is a personal relationship that was tied to that or something, or it was a referral, and all of a sudden everything went south. So it is important to still go through all the proper channels to make sure that you're picking the right local team. And we could talk about this all day long, but I'll just mention again, meet in person if possible. So you've got a project that comes up, that you're not going to do it internally. You want to find somebody to do it. If you don't already know them, meet with them in person, grab coffee, grab lunch, ask some tough questions, figure this out, the old fashioned way, I guess you could call it, sitting down and having a cup of coffee and talking about it. So this is probably the most important point of the group, and one that I hear quite often as I reference those stories. It's you have to understand your partner's workload that you're sending the work to. So one scenario, just kind of imagine this, you send it to somebody, things are going well. You get to the 11th hour on a project and it's not done. And even worse, it's not done and you don't even hear back from the person that was doing the work. So I hear that more often than you would think. So I know that's a tough scenario, but it happens. And I think most people are good. I believe that. And I just think people get really busy and they get nervous about having to deliver that message that, hey, this project's not done. And, a lot of times contractors and freelancers are working with a lot of people at one time. There's a lot on their plate. So I think it's a very fair question to ask before you give somebody work, like, hey, what's your capacity like? Are you going to be able to get this done? And no is an okay answer, because there's other people that can do it. And it's much better to start there than to get to that 11th hour and not be able to deliver. And then a common sense one here, just ask your friends, ask within your network. If somebody's had a good relationship, a good experience with somebody else locally, go to them and find out and figure out what was so good about that relationship. I would say that's an amazing place to start in finding the right local team. Absolutely.
You also need to keep track of your personal situation on this business that I have. One where I was just then it became a caretaker of his mother.
Right. 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 Yeah. It's true. Life gets complicated quick at times. So, yeah, it's good to know. I mean, if there's an open, transparent relationship there, it's helpful to know that kind of stuff. It's obviously nothing against that person. You have to be able to get your work done and deliver to your client, because ultimately you're going to be the one that's facing your client. So some offshore options. Again, Upwork, there's a lot of offshore possibilities there. As Brad mentioned, that's not the only platform. There's some vetted platforms, and I'm actually not incredibly familiar with that whole space, but I know that there are a lot of options there in terms of working offshore. Offshore teams, as I mentioned. So these are teams, really the specific part of this particular point is these are teams that are solely based in another place. They're not based in the U.S., and there's really not U.S. representation. And then in a really, I guess it's an emerging model, you could call it, but offshore teams with U.S. representation. So one that I hear fairly often is having U.S. project management or having U.S. sales representation, but having a team offshore. So that the person in the States is really kind of doing the management, the back and forth. That's your main point of contact. They're talking to the team that's offshore. and then coming back to you. So really your main point of contact is here in the States. That's an option I hear fairly often as well. And then ours is somewhat unique in that, and there are teams that do this. There's not nearly as many as you might imagine, but we actually have 5 total Americans and their families that live full-time in India and manage our team and kind of oversee delivery of projects. And there are other teams out there like us. We're not the only one. But I would think that, have you guys heard of that model very much, particularly that last one? Kind of U.S. representation, but managing an offshore team. And again, you got to find the right one. Great starting point, ask within your network. Probably the most crucial point that I'll make, and I think I heard some of this in even the initial statements that we're talking about, some of the experiences we have with some of these teams. You have to find a team that is extremely process driven. So there are so many variables in these projects, and particularly an offshore team, you're dealing with time zone, you're dealing with culture, you're dealing with not usually language, but sometimes language gaps there. There's just so many variables. And so if you don't find a team that's process driven, that's kind of starting from the very beginning, just opening you up to being susceptible to some of the bad things that can come from those variables. And it happens all the time. So I would strongly suggest finding a process-driven team. So much so that maybe your own internal process would improve from working with a team that is extremely process-driven. It's a cool kind of value add there.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Have you found that more process-driven teams have less flexibility and agility? Less flexibility or agility, like to be able to do what you want them to do if you need to pivot halfway through.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. I think it depends. I think it depends on the model. Obviously, I'm most familiar with ours, where we're working in this kind of agile approach and sprint approach. So if it's something technical that changes midway through the project, we actually have a process in place that supports that. But is that more what you're thinking, or?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
Even if you have a process for if things change.
Right.
That's still something.
Right. And I would say too, this is I mentioned working with a process-oriented team. Somebody that's just really, really good at this is potentially going to be helpful for you internally. But I would say it's really more of a marriage between whatever processes you currently have and the process that the other team has. So a lot of times with us, I mean, we can't say this is the way we're going to do it, or we're not working together. It doesn't work that way. And it's the same way with our clients. They come to us and they say, well, what are your processes? And we say, well, there's certain things that we want to integrate into exactly what you're doing. And there's other processes that we have that we feel like will help this overall relationship. So it's usually a marriage of the two. It's not kind of one way or the other, but the important thing is just having really strong processes. Talked about time zone. I mean, that's one that's just, it's tough. I mean, because there's just not a whole lot you can do about it, particularly on the West Coast. Like, I mean, it's a tough time zone to work with. And I'm thinking more in the context of Asia as well, where we're hanging out a lot. But definitely choose a time zone and also an hourly rate that fits and that works for you. It's definitely not something you want to walk into bitter, because you're having to get up at crazy hours to talk to the team, or you're having to stay up late. You can figure this stuff out on the front end and know that, hey, this is kind of what it's going to look like. I don't want to stay up late and talk to the team. I don't want to get up super early and talk to the team. And there's options around that. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. And then one other thing, if anybody is adventurous and likes to travel, go see the team. And I would encourage this maybe after you've started work. I don't know that this is something you want to just take off on some trip and go knocking on doors and finding a team. But say, you do a couple projects with somebody and you're trying to vet them a little bit still and figure out if you want to give them the next big project, or you really want to hitch your wagon to them and keep growing with this particular team. I would say just go see them, make a vacation out of it. and go see them. It is incredibly fulfilling when you've got somebody that's so closely tied to your business and is ultimately going to be an extension of your team, and you get to meet up with them in person when nobody really ever thought that was going to happen. It's really fulfilling. So we have people that come see us constantly. And it's fun. It's fun for us to host, and it's fun for the clients and really whoever to come see us. So this will give you a little bit of an idea of what we see in terms of offshore outsourcing options. So you see with Latin America, they're typically a little bit higher in terms of an hourly rate, and it's really because of that time zone issue. So it's an easier time zone to deal with on American time, working with Latin America. So of course we'll pay for that. We'll pay a bit of a premium to have that similar time zone. Europe, not too far off, roughly 8 hours difference in terms of time, but not too far off, and you're still going to see kind of an uptick in the rate there. And then with Asia, you're going to see some of the lowest rates, but also the biggest time difference. So India is 10.5 hours ahead. Kind of funny. 10.5, but it took some getting used to for me. But we're about to get an hour back, which would be nice. I won't have to be up so early all the time.
And they also don't do daylight savings, do they?
That's right. So we're the only ones that do that. So everybody else adjusts for us. But
that was a nightmare. We had we were trying to do a follow the sun model when we were doing support a couple of years ago. And that half an hour difference was surprisingly difficult to understand when the handoff should be.
Right.
So
yeah, it is kind of funny. So I'm like constantly on Google Calendar. I've got the 2 time zones set up, and I don't ever try to figure it out in my head. I just go straight to the calendar and figure it out there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you factor that in. Hey, but that'd be a fun team to go visit, though. An Italian team. Go see them. So.
One more thing about you need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is going to be that same.
Right.
And I lived in Arizona for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona is not going to be the same as California, but the reservation there is working with.
Right.
It's very confusing, and also you don't have to be offshore. Keep in mind about Alaska and Hawaii. They're U.S., but
Right. Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Absolutely. So I got a new record the other day for the lowest rate that I've heard. You might want to take a stab. See if
where
anybody-
or the rate?
Well, you can tell me both if you want. We'll start with what the rate is.
Did you call Fiverr?
No. This was somebody I was meeting with, and they were working with somebody paying this rate. Any idea?
I'm thinking Philippines, $3 an hour.
It's Bangladesh for $4 an hour. Yeah. I just I didn't know what to think about that. $4 an hour. That is quite low. Maybe that's it. Yeah. Yeah. So I was surprised by that one for sure. So
One of the things that we found with offshoring was it's been our experience that in the U.S. people can produce code and it's a full set of code, a full solution. Let's say I need you to create me an online form that you define specifications. I think in the U.S. we ask for that, we get it. When we've tried offshoring, we would get just really finite pieces.
Yeah.
And so it was from different countries too. We
Right.
tried, a couple of different countries over the years. And they gave you a form, but it doesn't do anything. Oh, well, but I gave you the form. It's
Right.
Like, well, no, I needed to go into the back end. But, and so we were getting just like little bits and pieces. So,
sure.
obviously, like with your model, you're managing that, and you're managing that and handling all that, so that the end client gets a whole solution.
Right.
Versus just, bits and pieces.
Maybe there's a better quality question around the deliverable that someone asking you. So that,
Yeah.
And the other part is, before we outsourced, we had never done it, so we were inexperienced.
Yes.
So what part of that was on us? We know how to project manage a certain way here.
Right.
Maybe we didn't do it as effectively. We tried it.
Sure.
Well, and I think another thing is you outsource because you don't have the experience and the expertise in the area. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know to tell them that's what you need.
Yeah.
We were attracted by the dollars, the low hour.
Yeah. I mean, if you cut through it all, it's that, right? I mean, that's where it starts. But then there's a lot. Wow, there's a lot. And I'll tell you, to your point, I don't like to generalize really about anything.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I mean, one common thing that comes up a lot is exactly what you said. And the way that that we talk about this internally is we want to train and teach our team to be consultative. It's a word that I never really used, but being consultative versus kind of staying within your box. And there are some scenarios where you absolutely need to stay within your box. Like you've got a job to do, you've got something to code, and that's what you do. And you stay in your lane, you go and do it. But there's other scenarios where clients actually really need some of that kind of consultative, like, okay, I know that he didn't tell me exactly to connect this dot and this dot, but I know that I really should. It's a tough balance, it is, but it's definitely, it's a very valid point.
Perhaps people that you can hire as a you understand that this is an issue.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know specifically for that, but I mean, it's somewhat kind of my heart behind a presentation like this. Like this is a tough space to navigate, even if you're doing it locally. I know offshore kind of takes the cake because there's a lot more stories to talk about and a lot more variables. But even if you're doing it locally, there are just some certain best practices that you kind of need to follow in order to do this really well. And yeah, I mean, it could be that you hire some type of consultant type role to be able to manage that relationship and know how to do that.
Somebody at WordCamp Asheville last year did one of the presentation on this,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just do WordPress development, but he was able to make it work, and actually hired a couple of these workers, and took some young kid who was 18 years old and did work for him, and basically gave this kid a job at his economic level in his country, which then helped his family. I mean, it was a really, neat story. But this guy and I don't think he was out of Asheville, but he was really good at that. And he took it, he basically took it as a mission to start hiring and improving his local economy. He did travel out there, overcame any of the challenges, that he had, and made it work. He was probably on WordPress.tv.
Right. Yeah. That'd be great to see. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's some really cool models. There really are, and it is fun to be able, like you mentioned, go see them, check it all out, connect the dots, see how. Because I would agree with some of the local,
That's a great model.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you just think about impact and making a difference, and I mean, some of these models totally support that as well, which is cool to see. So now let's talk about this. Let's talk about best practices. This will be a little more fun. Talking about how to do this well. So if you decide that outsourcing makes sense, either onshore or offshore, let's talk about some of the things that are pretty pivotal, in my opinion, to getting this right and to doing it really well, and kind of avoiding some of those issues and horror stories. So the first one being just vet your potential partner. Remember that their job is to really earn your business. So you've got the need, but they really need to earn your business and show you that, that they're a team that you can trust and that they're going to deliver. So again, meet with them, have some conversations. Try not to do everything over email or over some, just through technology, but actually meet with them. Obviously, if it's offshore, it's going to be a Zoom call or a Skype call or something like that. But just put a lot of value on spending time with that team before you give them the project. Ask for references. I'm guilty of this, but asking for references and not calling them or not emailing them and actually asking about their experience. So ask for references and then actually call them. Ask for a portfolio. So this is something we get asked about a lot. And one challenge that, or I shouldn't say challenge, but one point that I always make when we deliver a portfolio, there's a lot of scenarios where we didn't do the whole project. But when you see a portfolio, what are you looking at? You're looking at design. So like say, if we did the build and we didn't do the design and we just had to tack onto somebody else's design, whether we liked it or not, and it's in our portfolio, that's the impression. I mean, it just is what it is. So I think if you ask for a portfolio, it's important to understand what the team specifically did on that project before you make any kind of judgments on the team. But it is important to see the work. And then my favorite is, I think this is the best way to do it. Once you get through those couple initial phases, which I think should be standard with really anybody you're doing business with, but is just start with a little small project. Start with something that's, I won't say not important, I'll say low impact, right? So doesn't have a tight deadline. Let's say if everything else goes poorly, you could probably pick up and do it yourself kind of thing. Like that's what I mean when I say low impact. And just start and try it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you pivot after that. So some red flags to look for. If a team's not responsive, they're not timely on anything, clearly that's a red flag. Lack of process, like we talked about, that's definitely another red flag. Lack of professionalism, just it's not worth dealing with. There's a lot of options, a lot of teams. If you run into someone who just generally doesn't feel professional, doesn't treat this like it's very important and it's their job, I'd say that's a red flag as well, to move on, or at least ask some tough questions, just because there's other options. And then another great one here is never hearing no, or never hearing pushback to some of the questions that you ask. So any team that, we all know this, but any teams that claims that they're experts in everything, it's just probably not true. So in every question you ask, if they're constantly yes, 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 it's definitely at least worth throwing up a question mark there and, second guessing or like I mentioned, asking some tough questions.
Do you have any recommendations when you start small? That project a few months ago where it was a pretty big project. It was the first time I was working with that code.
Yep.
I had a contact.
Yep.
I had really choices and huge pocket.
Right.
First time working with this person. First outsourcing situation that I've experienced so far in my business. So
right.
Do you have any recommendations going into something like that to what you have to just jump in?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just makes those other points that much more important. Just meeting with them, fully understand. Were you under a tight deadline too? Or?
Not really, but
yeah.
Yeah. Realizing midway through the project, okay, this person isn't very timely and you can kind of find these out.
Sure.
That's one that I haven't said that yet. I don't think I think I maybe some email and said, oh yeah, he's good, but I didn't get really super in depth.
Right.
Saying, yeah, I should have gone more in depth.
Yeah.
More questions,
Mm-hmm.
phone call, just like something.
Sure.
I wonder how
Yeah.
Yeah.
how do you check? How do you tell?
Yeah, I know. Like that they didn't just pick their greatest champion and slip them a little money under the table to say they're awesome. Yeah, that's a good question. Wait, this is funny. Our references don't. I mean, our references are like incredibly honest. And that's one cool thing. It's like any team that claims to be perfect in this space that we're working in, it's just not true. Like there's a lot of things that are outside of our control that can make you be imperfect pretty quickly. And that might mean that you got to go back and fix something, right? And so, I mean, we have references that absolutely talk about scenarios with us where we've had to go back and change things and fix things, and whether it was our fault or not. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
Other problems here.
Yeah, see, I know it's a tough space to navigate. It's Facebook.
Yeah. So when you can't start small, something that has worked for us, and it's really for any contractor you're hiring. If it's a WordPress developer, that's kind of the lens I'm thinking of this out. It's good to get sample code from them. Ask them for sample code. Have a trusted partner that knows WordPress best practices. They know the WordPress codex, and they can review that code. They can be kind of an unbiased partner, and they can review that and make sure this is clean, this conforms to WordPress standards, this is the right way to do it. So that's one way you can do it. Another way, we've actually created an assessment, and just the 5-10 hours that it took for us to get those questions in the assessment has made all the difference on when we bring in contractors and new hires. A lot of this is not different than you get to hiring someone for your team, but it's made a huge difference with us. So those are ways to do it when you can't start small. You need to make decisions.
It's great, Brad. Yeah. So I know we're somewhat running up against time here, so we'll keep moving. Kind of move pretty quickly through these next few, but there's some good material here as well. So communication, obviously extremely important best practice. I would say these are things that you need to figure out and really document in your first meeting with a new partner. Fully understand how you're going to communicate through the whole life of the project. That's all the way down to the tools that you use. Transparency, I really mean this, not so much in terms of like transparent relationship, like Matt and I are super close, so we're not going to lie to each other kind of thing. It's like, I think more in terms of documentation. There's really three things that I would encourage you to make sure that are shared between the teams. Documentation around scope, and then obviously legal documentation. So even something like making sure there's NDAs in place when you're sharing code and showing code examples and all that stuff. And I'm sure you guys know that well. But yeah, sharing documentation, sharing code, and then sharing the hours that are logged. So you don't want to ever be surprised by the billable hours that you receive from your team at the end of the project. Like, you want to be able to log in at any point during the project and see that the hours are logged. And so that's, the onus is on the team to make sure that they are logging those hours at a set time. It doesn't have to be every day. You could agree on every week or something like that, but you need to make sure that they're logged. We use a Google Sheet, which works fine in most cases, but we have some clients that ask us to use some software, like we use Hubstaff, and sync it up with some, Asana or PMS or whatever. I heard mentioned earlier, I think it was Bill that mentioned this point. I think it was. I'm not totally sure. But anyways, having a single point of contact on both sides. So on a larger team here, it could be tough to figure out who's like the product owner in the relationship. So the product owner should be the single point of contact. And they're calling the shots. They might be communicating to other team members, but they're ultimately calling the shots. And they're communicating with a single point of contact on the other side, particularly if you're dealing with a team. Establish weekly meetings. We have found this to be incredibly important. Once again, this is something you establish on the first, but have a first meeting together, but have a standing weekly meeting. If it's Wednesdays at 9 a.m., know that that's going to be the time that you meet with the team every single week. And this is obviously in the life of a project, right? If you're not working with them in that particular mode, there's no need to meet with them. Let's just want to. But I think there are three very important questions that you should get the answer to from your team as you're working on a project in these weekly meetings. And they're what they did last week on your project, what they're currently working on, and then what's the plan for next week. What's going on? I mean, if you have those 3 questions answered, you should know exactly where your project stands. If it's a 4-week, what's that? Right. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that could be the case. I mean, I think the idea behind this is more in that kind of agile Scrum methodology of having these, like our team has daily stand-up meetings. We'll have weekly client stand-up meetings. So typically these are pretty short, just like status updates. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you can review, if there's something to review, it's a good idea. So what they did last week, what they're currently working on, and what the plan is for next week. And that's obviously assuming, I mean, that you can adjust those time frames, right? That's assuming sprints and all that different stuff. And then communication tools. I guess the one thing I wouldn't recommend as your sole communication tool, unless anybody has found great success with this, is using like a Slack or Google Hangouts as your sole communication tool. I've heard it somewhat here with like software teams here, using that as their only communication tool, but I don't know about working with an outside team. You can use that as a tool. We actually prefer a PMS system. So if our client is using a PMS system, we want to integrate into that so that we truly are kind of an extension of them, and they can just assign stuff there and keep communication succinct there. If there's not a PMS system in place, we'll usually just default to a pretty robust like Google Doc where everything's documented, keep everything there.
What's PMS?
Oh, I'm sorry. Project management system.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. So you think Trello, think Asana, think Basecamp, Teamwork. Those are all good PMS systems. There's a lot of them out there now. Stop me. I'll move quick. But stop me if you want to make any points here. No brainer here. Build a relationship. Just get to know them. I mean, these are people. People are people, and things tend to work better when there's a solid relationship there. I would say this is going to be the place where if and when there are challenges in a project, this is going to be the glue that holds it together. Having a good relationship with somebody and figuring out how to overcome challenges together, even if they're not a true like under your roof member of your team. They should really still be an extension of your team. You should know them well. Build trust. It takes time. It might take small project to a little bit bigger project to a little bit bigger project, or just jump right in with a big one and it goes really well. But build trust with the team. And then to your point earlier about knowing the culture, it's so important, and it actually makes it more fun. And this is in relation to working with an offshore team. But I know specifically for India, I mean, there's tons of holidays, tons of festivals, and from a working relationship, a lot of offices are closed on days that we're working hard, and then it's a big deal in India for that office to be closed on that day, so that's an important thing to know. And it's also just fun to have, conversations with your team that you're working with about those holidays, and that's a cool way to build a relationship with them, understanding their communication style, working culture.
One of the things that Americans don't realize is that we speak American, whereas offshore people have learned English, standard regular English without the American names. So that's something to be aware of in communicating offshore.
Right.
My sister landed in France not knowing French, and then had to learn it and realize that they speak very clearly and specifically with the words rather than idioms, put it out of the park. Those things offshore people don't know. So
right.
That being clear is how to communicate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's helpful to bend a little bit too. If you know you're working with a team in France, it's helpful to kind of bend our American ways and think, okay, how would somebody from France interpret this? How can I communicate really well with somebody in France? And I would encourage that. Absolutely. Good. So a couple book recommendations. The Culture Map is actually perfect for somewhere like France. I think Erin Meyer actually, she either still lives in France or lived in France when she wrote this book. So that's a great use case. This is a fascinating book. It was tough for me to not have to try to put the lens of India on everything as I read it, because it talks about a lot of different cultures communicating with each other. But this is a great book to help kind of wrap your head around some of that cultural difference and how we can adapt and how other cultures should adapt and vice versa. And it was fascinating because it wasn't just Americans to other cultures. It might be, totally different culture to a totally different culture than what we're familiar with and how they would communicate together. And then this one is particular with India. It's more of my context. So he wrote it really from like an IT perspective, which is fascinating. I think we all know what India has looked like over the last 20 years and tons of work being done there in the IT space. And so that was the purpose of writing this book, and just acknowledging the cultural differences there and figuring out ways to overcome those. So if you're interested in, particularly in India, that is a great book for that. Here's just another way of kind of phrasing some of the best practices here, some do's and don'ts. So do have tons of documentation, proper documentation on both sides. Do proper vetting, and then start with low impact projects. And then don't throw all your eggs in one team's basket. What I mean by that is don't give every single project you have to one team and just hope it works out. If you've got tons of work and you're trying to figure all this out, I would have a couple teams in place. I would have a couple people in place if you're working with a contractor or a freelancer. I just wouldn't throw everything in one team's basket, because everybody, even big teams, run out of capacity at times, and they might ultimately tell you they can't do it, and you were really relying on them to get it done. So it's good to have options there. Don't give up after the first challenge or difficulty. Again, this is totally in offshore and onshore. There are just challenges. Like we mentioned earlier, there are things that are outside of our control that cause our jobs to be really hard at times. And so as long as there's no glaring, crazy thing that happened that makes you want to fire somebody on the spot, I get that at times. Don't give up after the first challenge or first difficulty. If there's like 100 challenges or difficulties, that's different. But and then don't, if this is relevant to anybody here, don't just go hire another team and just totally get rid of your in-house developers. So a lot of times what we do, we're not even communicating with, the owner of the company, or even 3 levels down. I mean, we're talking to their head developer. We're talking to a developer that's the product owner on the project. I mean, these are sometimes very crucial roles in that relationship. And so don't just find an outsourcing team, go, kind of let go of all your developers in-house. That is not at all what we're saying by any of this too. So I have a few more slides, but I think with these last couple minutes, if it's okay.
Oh yeah, we have the day.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to start winding down in about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So we're still good on time.
Some people might need to sneak out. That's
Okay, good. Sounds good. Well, I wanted to open this up. I was chomping at the bit to do it earlier. Is anybody willing to share? I'm looking for 2 things. Who thinks they have the worst outsourcing story? Then there's somebody in here's blood's probably boiling right now, and you need to let it out. And maybe the worst outsourcing story, horror story, and then somebody that could share us a good story. And we'll kind of land on a good story. Is anybody willing to share a bad story?
Recent experience with an outsourced developer, local, and I asked him, hey, would you have availability to do X, Y, and Z? And instead of responding yes, he just went and did the work, which, well, yeah, and logged it on his timesheet. And I was like, well, maybe I had a little bit more to tell you about that. But, I think assumptions are the biggest issue that I face. Assuming what my teammate understands and what I think should be given, and their,
right.
assumptions of what I'm saying when,
right.
that's not what I'm saying. And on the flip side, I had another really great relationship with my VA, who's who I outsource to, and she basically reads my mind in a positive way. Like her assumptions always work out. So
Right. So nice. April.
yeah, well, I mean, mostly because it was I'm the leader.
Yeah.
And it's my responsibility to make sure things are very clear and spelled out. And if
Sure.
it's vagary, then that's my responsibility.
Well, your wisdom has shown already, and that, I mean, that was part of the next step is, what about that scenario could we have changed?
Exactly.
And maybe it's that. I mean, I get it. Like, that's unreasonable for somebody to do that. But it's, hey, I mean, what can we do? What best practice can we follow?
Now we can address that and make sure it's very clear that.
There you go. Anybody top April's? We heard one earlier. That was pretty good.
That's
Yeah.
I got another one.
Okay.
I was gonna put in a second MRI in downtown Chicago. And what you don't understand is, if you put anything in downtown Chicago, you have to have the alderman look alderman okay to do it, no matter what it is. So I wanted to put in a $268,000 into an area where I had to get the alderman's okay just to get the equipment in there because of the streets. I can't take the weight load. So instead of it coming in with 3 flatbeds, I had to use 8 flatbeds. Bring it in. So we're doing all this. Well, they did a whole scenario for me and said, okay, we can do it this way. And they gave me a bill for doing it. I mean, and I had to pay $3,000 to the alderman's nephew in order to get the appointment home. That's Chicago.
I was gonna say, it's a lot of dynamics on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to 7 flat.
Yeah.
So it's easy outside of Chicago. My place is Lake. It's very easy to work. And believe me, I've been here 5 years now, and I'm trying to work with people in Georgia.
We're all nice here.
It's very easy. So yeah.
It's good.
Mine's not a worst case, but communication and documentation are definitely so important. When I was younger and I was that person that was getting the outsourcing work, I was working directly with the art director. We had worked on these things, we talked, discussed, got it finally home. And then she shows it to her creative director who says, oh no, we're not using that. And refused, the creative director said, we're not paying for it either. The art director was really very savvy. She still went ahead and paid me out of her pocket, which was extremely generous in my estimation. She shouldn't have had to have done that, but if it had more communication, I might have known that I needed to have said up front, maybe, this is my fee. Take the lead.
Sure.
That was fun.
Yeah. Learning moments, right? Yeah.
Mine was the one that I alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
It was a project on WordPress, so it was out of like I understand what I was managing really.
Right.
So even to go through like the interviewing process with the developer that I went with, like I didn't even know like hats or how to know what he was talking about. So like I said, it was a huge project that we kind of like jumped in at first, and there were times when we were on the phone with a client together, and he would say, "Oh yeah, I can do that for you today." I promised them that it is that day, and he wouldn't get it done that day. So I was constantly kind of chasing behind him.
Right.
And finally had to get on the phone and say, what you're saying.
Right.
And essentially told me, like, I've got these bigger fishes than you. You're right. And I was like, well, to me, and to my client, this is a big project. So
Yeah.
we have to see it that way. And so we patched things and he was like, I do it today.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, he said he did it finally.
Right.
No, he didn't do it.
Yeah.
It was really a disaster.
It's
tough.
Finally, like I do, but I'm not feeling I was so happy that he volunteered. Okay, I'm stepping out from the projects. I had something else. So
Right.
So that I could try and just put the pieces together afterwards.
Right.
Pretty much demolished by that point.
That's my greatest fear is that when I outsource, I'm lending my reputation and credibility to this team. And what they do with it is totally up to them. But I'm the one that has to deal with the garnishment.
Right.
So now I feel like that. You know, that
Yeah.
client's probably not going to have that super word. You know. Obviously, I see now in retrospect all the parts that I could have done better.
Sure.
Project manager. You know, that ultimately on us, you know, it's responsibility.
Yeah.
We started, 25 years ago, so everything was new.
Right.
And so, Perl scripting, yeah, we'll do that. .NET development, yeah, we'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all new, and we could sort of pride ourselves on that.
Yeah.
It really did put a burden on Rhonda to have to, and she got it all, but she would have to manage it. And so, in the end, the projects were successful, we delivered, and we made a profit.
Right.
I'm flat, wore her out. I mean, so sometimes the burden of that is just internal.
Sure.
And now we're to the point. I mean, I had a Drupal project come in, earlier in the week. I'm like, we want to take it. She's like, no, we're not taking it.
Yeah.
Why? It's $1,000s. No, we're not taking it.
Could be the new White House
It was a
redesign.
Drupal project that I got.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, when we were building it, it was like, oh, we're going to take, the whole internet, we're going to take everything.
Yeah.
Now it's like,
Right. Yeah. Got it.
I don't really want to use it. Decades back, I had a business, something, and I had a manager. I did the sales and I kept track of it all, but she did that. She kept track of people, she kept track of projects. If somebody was away, she told me away. If there was a plant problem, she told me away. If you have people, the staff really work on somebody like that is essential.
Right. 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 Yeah. Could be a scenario where the product owner is not the owner of the business, right? Somebody else. Yeah.
We didn't talk about outsourcing sales. So somebody's approached us recently, and so we're having a conversation with this person. It's kind of interesting. And we've tried over the years to hire salespeople.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see
Yeah.
how that scenario goes.
Can outsource
Because
anything.
again, you're sort of flipping it, but she's going to have to adhere to our systems and processes, but we don't want to hamstring her if she's going to go out and start generating the numbers she was telling us are pretty substantial. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, with VAs, virtual assistants, sales is a kind of an up and coming model for that. You can outsource that and have a team that learns and understands your business, but they're not technically on your team. You're just paying them retainer stuff or whatever. It's really interesting. I know you have a story you want to share, right?
And stories, a client who had outsourced her website to someone in India. She said it was a disaster. And she found an American company to build it and build a new one. But that company outsourced it to India too, without her knowledge.
Yeah.
So she, and she was the client, she was a science person. She did not speak website. So she then came to me for marketing. I look at the website and right click, see the code. I said, where's the Google Analytics? Where's the Yoast SEO? So I ended up, she's like, well, can you talk to the guy in India? Because I don't know what to say.
Right.
So, and then the other thing, we did do a Zoom, the accent was so thick, I couldn't make that feel what he was saying.
Yeah.
So email for me was better.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes you think you're getting an American team and you're not.
Yeah.
They're outsourcing it to someone else, and that's the same with Upworks and Odesk, and they're all tied in together now. But I run into that with social media marketing, that somebody thinks they're getting a local or West-based team, and they're not. So that's something to be aware of.
Totally.
When you're outsourcing, thinking you're getting Americans.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. That's another industry. I think that transcends industry too. I think that transcends our industry too. That's, it's amazing. I mean, these massive companies have really massive operations in different countries.
I think you're buying an American car, but it was really assembled.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up on this. Who's got a good story? Who's got I know we could probably tell a story on Brad, a good story with Brad, and he just walked out, which is a great opportunity to say good things about him, right?
Yeah, he's done good at it before.
Sure.
And what Brad Service does is they do website maintenance and small updates for WordPress consultants and agencies. And I'm Houston, and it's a flawless, in my experience.
Right.
You just, they get a branded email or a private email that you use for your support. Client emails that, it gets CC'd to you, it goes straight to them, and they act as like your support and maintenance.
Right.
A really fantastic experience. Now, the difference is in that when you're talking about different teams, like for me, if I'm going to build a recurring income maintenance thing, I would have Brad do that, but then I need another team for development and developing sites from scratch, because although they do some development work, that's not their sweet spot. So
right.
I would want someone who does something very specifically.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
As a marketer, I would just strongly recommend that website builders, designers, whatever, are building that site to keep in mind the marketing. Because as I tell potential clients, I can only market you based on what your website is saying. And a lot of times, the website is crap, and I say, well, there's not much I can do. Let's start there and go. So that's something to keep in mind. And the other thing that's very important, coming May 25th this year, the European rules about data, the GDPR rules, and so if clients have their clients, website clients have clients overseas in Europe, there's all these rules about data collection and cookies and privacy and stuff. So it's just a really look at that. Yeah. Because that's the website owner and client can get really slammed with fines if the data collection is not visible to the audience in that European country.
Yeah, it's great to know. Good. Well, real quick, this will take about 30 seconds. Let's just talk about 6 potential benefits. And this is awesome because there's no room for debate. We're just going to I'm going to throw you these 6 benefits and we're just going to walk out the door. Yeah, exactly. No, that's not true, but we will go quickly because I know we've been here a while. So you can take on more work. We've talked about this a lot. Potential to do that if you want. It's a cool thing about this whole outsourcing space. It's pretty non-committal for the most part if you want it to be. So if you want to take on more work, you've got a good option to do that. Have a team to be able to do it. You can scale quickly, kind of the same thing. Scale without increasing overhead. Close deals, have projects, find people to help you get them done. Greater margins. Actually, I think I wrote this thinking about money so much, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, man, this is really more of a time issue. If you're bogged down by coding and you're not a coder, you're a designer, you're bogged down by WordPress maintenance, and it's kind of like crushing your time, and you're not being able to allocate that to more to something else that's more valuable to your business. It's a great benefit, more time, and the money piece of that is debatable, but so we won't get into that so much. Faster ramp time. So you think about time that you would be training a developer in-house, particularly like a junior developer, and kind of spending that time with them, getting them up to speed, or training them on lots of different things. You can really just spend that time finding a team that's good for you, and then training them on your communication, your processes, and making sure that gels pretty well. Faster ramp time, get a project. Quickly expand competency. Get a Drupal project that you just can't turn down. Quickly become somebody that can take on a Drupal project by having another team or having somebody step in for that project. And obviously Drupal's not the only example. I mentioned earlier, we get asked about, our clients get asked about mobile apps all the time, and that's not something that they technically do, but we do, so we can help them with that. And then focus your energy on what you do best. Just do what you love in your business. Do what kind of drew you to it in the first place. And then find some other good partners to help you out on the stuff that say you don't love quite as much. So. Cool. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you outsourced your design, was that the first time that you guys had been an outsourcing client as a team? And if so, did you learn anything from that perspective of being the client?
That's such a great question, April. I can't fully answer that first one because I'm not sure. There might have been something at some point that, we partner with someone, and I absolutely know that we have, but in that particular realm, I don't think so. But I got to be pretty intimately involved in kind of the selection and that whole process. So I loved it because I'm sitting on the other side of the whole sales scenario, and it was fun. I'm like, this is amazing. We learned a ton about proposals. We learned a ton about process and delivering a proposal. We were shocked to see that a lot of people didn't even respond to our requests, like people that we know, clients, which I don't think they intentionally didn't respond. It's like they just didn't have time, and they've got a hot project sitting in their inbox, and then nothing. And then we were having to follow up to get proposals and like, hey, we got one here waiting for you if you want it. And that's another thing I learned. And then, man, once we were into the project, even there was a lot we were learning kind of along the way. And it didn't, nothing was derailing. Most of it wasn't even negative. It was just like, man, these are all important points that we need to keep in mind when we're delivering to our clients. And when I'm out, working with prospects, these are things that I probably wouldn't have thought about if I had not gone through this exercise. So, so much so that we said, we'll find something to do once a year, something to outsource to somebody else. And support somebody else's business, support one of our clients' business or a prospect's business or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. It keeps it fresh. Maybe not so much on the outsourcing the design of the website every year or the messaging or something like that every year, but just something. And there are lots of things internally that we could use some outside help on.
And I think that's an important message too to carry on to the people that you're talking to, is that just following up push you ahead of 50% of all the people that are buying for this business, just being consistent. It's not that hard to shine. You just have to show up a lot of the time.
That is awesome. Yep, exactly. Yeah, and hopefully that's encouraging. I think we sent it maybe to 6 or 7 of our clients. And we know these are good people, right? We know them. Again, they didn't intentionally do it, but I think only 3 got back to us. So be responsive, opportunities like that means a lot. Anything else? Any other questions? Thoughts? Good. Thank you, guys. Yeah.